Picture the most famous seer in the ancient Near East, a man whose spiritual vision is so highly regarded, so legendary that regional kings will literally empty their royal treasuries just to purchase his curses.
Oh, absolutely. They'd pay anything.
Right, anything. Yet, on a dusty, unremarkable road to Moab, this celebrated visionary is completely blind to a terrifying, sword-wielding angel of the Lord standing right in front of him. And the profound irony here? His ordinary, everyday beast of burden sees the lethal danger with perfect clarity.
It really is the ultimate paradox, isn't it? It's the very definition of a blind prophet, which perfectly sets up the central mystery we are unpacking today. Like, how does a man who supposedly speaks directly to the God of Israel become so profoundly spiritually blinded that a donkey has to save his life not once but 3 times?
Welcome to the debate. Today, we are investigating Numbers 22 and the terrifying dilemma it presents. We're asking, what really happened on the road to Moab? Because this isn't just a bizarre ancient folktale about a talking animal.
No, not at all.
It is a rigorous investigation into the paradox of human motives and, the very real consequences of seeking loopholes in a divine command. I argue that Balaam's spiritual blindness was a direct result of his own internal corruption, which proves that spiritual sight is tied to motives, not just proximity to the divine.
I hear that. But I come at it from a very different angle. Because the natural practical pushback any thoughtful listener has when reading this text is the glaring, almost irreconcilable contradiction in the narrative itself.
A contradiction?
Yeah, exactly. If Av clearly told Balaam he was allowed to go with the second royal delegation, why does the text say God's anger was instantly aroused the moment Balaam saddled his donkey? To me, this text presents a deeply unsettling dilemma about obedience. It asks how any human being is supposed to navigate a spiritual landscape where God's clear yes is immediately followed by a drawn sword.
I completely understand why you see a contradiction there, but let me push back on that framing right out of the gate. I don't see this as a contradiction in God's commands. I see it as a direct result of the cataract that greed forms over spiritual vision.
But he still had permission to go.
He did, but Balaam was a prophet who genuinely communicated with the God of Israel, yet his overwhelming desire for regional fame, and specifically for Moabite gold, broke his internal compass. The theological truth here is about God's permissive will. God allowed the physical journey, yes, but he stood as an adversary against Balaam's corrupt motives. It's not a divine trap. It's a revelation of what was already in the man's heart.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that it's quite that clean. To claim this is just about motives softens the absolute terror of the text, I think. To truly grasp why Balaam is even on this road, we have to pause and look at the geopolitical terror unfolding in the region at the time.
Right, the historical context is crucial.
Exactly. You have the Israelites who have escaped Egypt, survived the desert, and have just utterly crushed 2 powerful regional kings in battle. They are a massive, terrifying horizon-to-horizon force camped right on the border of Moab. King Balak of Moab is looking at this encampment of former slaves, and he is in a state of absolute existential panic. He knows conventional military victory is statistically impossible.
Which is precisely why he turns to the ancient Near Eastern practice of spiritual warfare. We have to remember that in this era, nations didn't just fight with swords and chariots, they fought with the gods.
Yeah, it was a totally different worldview.
It was. It was a widely held belief that certain high-level individuals possessed the spiritual mechanics to bless or curse entire nations, and that these incantations carried tangible military weight. Cursing a nation was essentially the ancient equivalent of deploying a nuclear deterrent. Balak wants to hire Balaam, a man whose reputation is essentially whoever you bless is blessed and whoever you curse is doomed.
But hold on, let me stop you there, because this is where the geopolitical arrangement becomes incredibly strange. If Balak is a pagan king, why would he send a fortune to hire a prophet who consults Yahweh?
You mean the God of Israel?
Right, the very God of the people Balak wants to destroy. It highlights the incredibly complex, almost contradictory spiritual allegiance of Balaam. Are you telling me a pagan king is trying to hire Israel's own divine defense attorney to switch sides?
Actually, yes, I am. And we aren't just guessing about Balaam's reputation as a spiritual gun for hire. We really need to talk about the archaeological evidence here because it is mind-blowing.
Oh, the Deir Alla text?
Yes, exactly. In 1967, archaeologists discovered the Deir Alla Inscription in modern Jordan. It's an 8th century BC text written on plaster, completely outside of the biblical narrative, and it explicitly names Balaam, son of Beor. It describes him as a seer of the gods.
Wow, so he was widely known.
Oh, entirely. This moves Balaam from a mythical folktale character to a verifiable, historically documented figure. He wasn't some isolated Israelite priest. He was an international spiritual mercenary. Balak is basically saying, I don't care which god you talk to, just give me the right result and name your price.
That archaeological context actually creates a massive theological problem, though. If Balaam is this internationally renowned mercenary who will curse anyone for a price, why does he even bother asking Yahweh for permission when Balak's men first arrive?
Well, he knew who held the real power.
Sure, but when that first delegation shows up with the going rate for a curse, Balaam actually does the right thing. He asks God, and God's answer is crystal clear, absolute, and unambiguous. Do not go with them, do not curse this people, for they are blessed. Case closed. Balaam tells the messengers to go home. If the story ended there, Balaam is a hero of obedience.
But it doesn't end there because Balak doesn't take no for an answer. He sends a second delegation, more prestigious officials, a blank check. And this is exactly where we see the fatal flaw, the loophole dilemma. Balaam's facade completely cracks.
He does say the right sayings at first, though.
He says all the right theological words to these new princes. Yes, he tells them, even if Balak gave me his palace filled with silver and gold, I could not do anything to go beyond the command of the Lord my God. It sounds incredibly pious.
Right, it sounds perfect on paper.
But then in the very next breath, he adds, now stay here tonight and I will find out what else the Lord will tell me.
Yes, what else? As if the absolute no from the previous night had an expiration date just because the price went up. It is the most relatable psychological moment in the text.
It really exposes human nature.
It does. It is exactly like a child asking a parent for permission to do something dangerous. The parent gives it clear no, but then the child's friend gets a new toy, the stakes are raised, and the child comes back asking again and again, hoping to wear the parent down. And the terrifying part of Numbers 22 is that God finally caves. God says, since these men have come to summon you, go with them. God changes the standard.
I see why you frame it as God changing the standard, but let me give you a different perspective, because I think the child-parent analogy misses the mechanism of what's actually happening. It's almost like algorithmic bias in modern tech.
Algorithmic bias? How so?
Well, Balaam's internal algorithm is so heavily weighted toward getting paid that he keeps querying the system until he gets a result he can use. God didn't change his mind about the morality of the action. He handed Balaam over to his own destructive desires. Think of it like a GPS.
Okay, I'm following.
If you insist on driving off a cliff, eventually the GPS stops telling you to make a U-turn and just says, proceed to the route. God isn't giving a green light. He is lifting the safety net. He's removing the guardrails. That is the essence of permissive will.
I hear your removal of guardrails analogy, but you have to admit that feels a bit like a theological rationalization just to protect God's reputation in the text. You're trying to smooth out the edges of a very sharp narrative.
I wouldn't call it smoothing out the edges.
But the text literally says God told him to go, and then, the very next morning when Balaam eagerly saddles his donkey, it says God's anger was kindled. It means that sometimes the most dangerous thing God can say to us is yes. It means you can be technically operating under divine permission while simultaneously walking directly into divine judgment.
But the judgment isn't about the physical act of walking. It's about the internal state of the walker. The New Testament writers, specifically in 2 Peter and Jude, refer to this as the way of Balaam, a willingness to sell out prophetic integrity for financial gain.
So the action was permitted, but the heart was judged.
Exactly.
God said go, giving permission for the physical action, but Balaam took that as an endorsement of his greed. That's why the journey itself becomes this masterpiece of escalating physical and spiritual tension. God's opposition takes a physical form on the narrow road.
And let's dive into that physical journey, because the mechanics of it are fascinating. You have this invisible angel of the Lord, sword drawn, acting as an adversary to block the path, and it happens in 3 distinct stages. But the text is very specific about the geography of each stage.
Yes, the narrowing of the path.
First, they are in a wide open field. The donkey, possessing the spiritual vision her master entirely lacks, sees the angel and swerves off the road into the field.
Notice how the physical space mirrors his spiritual state. God is literally beginning to squeeze him. But what is Balaam's reaction? He beats the animal.
Let's pause and look at the psychological blindness here. Balaam is a seasoned rider. He has ridden this specific donkey his entire life. Now, if my car suddenly swerves itself off the highway for no mechanical reason, I check the engine.
Right, you look for a cause.
I look for an obstacle. I don't just punch the dashboard in blind fury. When a loyal, entirely predictable animal suddenly breaks character and bolts into a field, a normal person, especially a seer who makes his living interpreting signs, would stop and ask, what is spoking my animal? But he doesn't.
He's totally oblivious.
He is so blinded by the anticipation of a payday that his internal state completely overrides his external perception.
Exactly. His algorithmic bias filters out the giant glowing red flag. So the angel moves to a narrower spot, a path between 2 vineyard stone walls. The space is shrinking. There is no open field to swerve into anymore. The donkey sees the sword, panics, and presses itself hard against the stone wall, crushing Balaam's foot in the process.
The physical pain escalates the spiritual blindness. He beats the donkey a second time. Then we reach the third obstruction. The angel stands in an impassable, narrow spot.
Nowhere to turn.
Right. No room to go right. No room to go left. The geometry of the road has completely eliminated his options. The donkey realizes there is literally no way forward that doesn't end in death. So it simply collapses. It lies down under Balaam.
At which point, Balaam completely loses whatever remains of his composure. He starts violently beating the donkey with his staff. Think about the image here. He is a famous international prophet, a man of supposedly elevated spiritual consciousness, reduced to throwing a violent tantrum in the dirt, brutalizing the very creature trying to save his life.
It's pathetic, really.
It is. God has squeezed him into a corner to force him to wake up. And when the physical squeezing doesn't work, the natural order of the universe is broken. The Lord opens the donkey's mouth.
Now, if you are listening to this, this is the exact moment where your modern scientific brain probably hits a wall. A talking donkey? It sounds like a children's fable.
It really does sound absurd at first glance.
But if we get stuck on the biological impossibility, we miss the absolute brilliance of the literary and theological irony here. The animal asks a perfectly rational, syntactically structured question. What have I done to you that you have beaten me these 3 times?
A very fair question.
If you or I are riding an animal and it turns around and speaks fluent syntax to us, the only appropriate reaction is absolute mind-shattering terror. You run screaming.
But Balaam doesn't scream. He doesn't even flinch at the broken laws of physics.
Exactly. Balaam is so consumed by his own ego, his greed, and his rage that the sheer impossibility of a talking beast doesn't even register. He engages in a bitter, completely normalized argument with his livestock.
It's almost comical.
It is. He snaps back. You have made a fool of me. If I had a sword in my hand, I would kill you right now. Anger and greed had so thoroughly bypassed this man's logic that he actually debates his own transportation, and he loses the debate.
He does lose because the donkey offers an airtight, empirical defense. The donkey essentially says, "Am I not your own donkey, which you have always ridden to this day? Have I ever been in the habit of doing this to you?" The animal is asking the master to use basic, observable data, and Balaam, the grand visionary, is forced to admit no.
It's incredible. The international spiritual mercenary
is grounded by the common sense of a beast of burden.
And it is only in that moment of complete humiliation, when the prophet's pride is entirely dismantled by an animal, that the veil is finally lifted. The text says, "The Lord opened Balaam's eyes, and he finally sees the angel of the Lord standing in the road with the drawn sword."
And the angel's first words to him are incredibly telling. He doesn't start with a lecture on the geopolitical mission or Moabite relations. He starts with animal welfare.
That's a great point.
He says, "Why have you beaten your donkey these 3 times? I have come here to oppose you because your path is a reckless one before me." The angel explicitly states that if the donkey hadn't turned away, Balaam would be a dead man and the donkey would have been spared. The very thing Balaam viewed as the obstacle to his success was actually his salvation from destruction.
I love that you bring up the angel's exact phrasing, because I want to emphasize the profound mercy in this terrifying encounter. This wasn't just a trap to kill a disobedient prophet. It was a severe intervention.
It was definitely severe.
When Balaam finally sees the sword, he bows down, confesses his sin, and offers to turn back. But the angel tells him to proceed, with one ironclad caveat: speak only what I tell you. God has now fundamentally altered the terms of engagement. Balaam thought he could negotiate a loophole with God. The sword proved he could not.
Which sets up the grand finale of this narrative perfectly. The aftermath of the road to Moab and the absolute failure of Balak's scheme, Balaam finally arrives at the Moabite camp. King Balak is ready for his return on investment.
He wants what he paid for.
Exactly. He takes Balaam up to the high places, overlooking the vast, terrifying camp of Israel. They build altars, they sacrifice bulls and rams, setting the stage for this catastrophic, nation-destroying curse. Balak has paid the money. He expects the product.
But the curse refuses to come. Across 4 separate attempts at 4 different geographic vantage points, Balak tries to manipulate the spiritual environment. But every single time Balaam opens his mouth, he is completely overpowered by the Spirit of God.
He can't help himself.
No, he is compelled to deliver sweeping, poetic blessings over Israel instead of curses. In fact, these aren't just polite well wishes. They escalate into profound messianic oracles. By Numbers 24, Balaam ends up prophesying, "A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel." Think about the weight of that.
It's massive.
The pagan mercenary, hired to destroy Israel, ends up delivering one of the most vital, foundational prophecies of the coming Messiah.
And you can just feel King Balak's blood pressure rising with every single syllable. He clenches his fists, absolutely furious, shouting at Balaam, "I summoned you to curse my enemies, but you have blessed them these 3 times. Actually 4 times by the end of it."
Poor Balak. He had no idea what he was dealing with.
Balak's reaction is the ultimate realization of the text. No amount of human scheming, no amount of geopolitical pressure, and no amount of financial bribery can reverse what God has fundamentally blessed. Balak thought he could buy the divine court, but human economics holds 0 weight in spiritual reality. He walks away with absolutely nothing.
To summarize my position in light of this remarkable historical and textual journey, the evidence clearly shows that Balaam was blinded by his own internal desires, not by a confusing set of instructions from God.
I still see the tension, but go on.
The story proves that true spiritual sight is not just about having access to God's voice, or holding a recognized religious title, or even possessing historical renown like we see in the Deir Alla Inscription. Sight is intrinsically tied to motives. When our internal algorithms are corrupted by the desire for wealth, status, or self-preservation, we become entirely blind to the divine warnings standing right in front of us.
And my summary remains focused on the terrifying reality of God's permissive will. The story of Balaam on the road to Moab is a haunting reminder that sometimes the most dangerous consequence of persistent selfish inquiry is that God might actually grant it.
A sobering thought.
It really is. It warns us that receiving what our corrupt hearts demand can place us on a narrow road with an adversary we cannot even see. We want a God who always acts as a safety net, but sometimes God's yes is simply the lowering of the guardrail, allowing us to face the natural, lethal consequences of our own stubbornness.
There is a profound, continued mystery here, isn't there?
We both agree on the deep, layered irony the text employs: a rational, talking beast and an irrational, blind prophet to expose the absolute folly of trying to manipulate the divine will.
Oh, 100%.
There is a lingering, uncomfortable tension in how God uses deeply flawed, resistant, even mercenary individuals like Balaam to speak undeniable eternal truths.
Yes, the complexity of it requires holding multiple perspectives at once. We have to sit with the discomfort. Balaam is both a genuine receiver of divine oracles and a man whose internal compass was entirely broken by greed. It forces us to ask very uncomfortable questions about our own obedience and, whether we are actually listening to the answers we claim to be seeking.
At the beginning of our discussion, we pictured the celebrated visionary, famous for his insight, unable to see the lethal reality right in front of his face. He thought his prestige and his persistence gave him the right to negotiate with absolute truth.
But truth doesn't negotiate.
No, it doesn't. It leaves us with a heavy, enduring psychological question to take away. When the answer has already been made crystal clear, why do we still keep asking, hoping against hope, to hear a different, more profitable truth?